In this video, we'll be covering the rhythm for the Level 2 Rhythm 2 test. Again, these are things that we've done mostly in class, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in this video. I'm going to go through some things pretty quickly. If you have questions, of course, you can always ask me. But this is mostly to give you an idea of what kinds of things you can be expecting on your test and how it's formatted and how you can be sort of best prepared to take the test. In Rhythm 2, we're essentially adding the concept of 16th notes, and we're getting rid of some ties and replacing them with some dotted rhythms. So for the 16th notes, they're essentially just subdivisions of our 8th note. If our 8th notes are 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, our 16th notes are subdivided even further to 1E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a, 4E and a. For every 2 8th notes, that gives us 4 16th notes. For every 1 8th note, 2, and so forth. So if we're to take a look at our first example up here, we started off with 4 16th notes. So that would give us 1E and a. If we were to have this as 2 8th notes, you'll notice that because it's 1 8th note per 2 16th notes, this would be 1 and this would be and. Our and is falling in the same place. 1E and a versus 1 and. So our E and our a are essentially falling in between the and the number for each beat. So in between 1 and we have E, in between and the next big beat we have a. So if we were continuing on, because this is again the format you'll see on your test, we have 2 8th notes. We've used up all of beat 1 with 1E and a. So this starts us off on beat 2 to give us 2 and. Hopefully that part's familiar to you by now. We now have a rest right on beat 3, so our rest goes in parentheses. That uses up the first half of beat 3, so our next note falls on the end of 3. And now we get to another set of 16th notes. So this would be 4, E, and a. Full disclosure, it won't be quite that easy on your test. This is just for demonstration purposes. Now we get to a dotted quarter note. Our dotted quarter note, as we talked about in class hopefully by now, unless you're watching this way ahead of time, is essentially the same as a quarter note and an 8th note tied together. A dotted quarter note is just another way to write it to make things simpler and a little cleaner. So if this is the same as a quarter note and an 8th note tied together, that means this uses up all of 1 and 2. We'd put a 1 here, and our next note would fall on the and of beat 2. Now we have a new sort of grouping of notes that starts with 2 16ths and ends with an 8th. It might look scarier than it is, but essentially we're going to use our same number E and a formula. So in this case, we're starting here on beat 3, so we'd have 3E. So that makes up our first 2 16ths. That means the next thing would fall on what? And. Because it's an 8th note, it uses up the entire and of a beat. So this completes beat 3, 3E and, meaning our next note falls on beat 4. Now if we take a look down here in our next system or line of sorts, we start with 1E. Now we have a tie. The E and the and of this beat are tied together. We would skip the and because it's less than a half note by quite a bit, and we would put an a under the last 16th. 1E a. Followed by beat 2. Then beat 3. Then 4 and. Hopefully you're with me so far. Now in our last measure here, we start with 1. It's an 8th note, takes up the first half of the beat. We get to and. This and is tied to the beginning of beat 2. And it uses up our 8th note. It's going to use up all of, if we were thinking in 16th note terms, 1E, right? Because it uses up the entire first half of the beat. So again, if we had, or I guess 2E in this case, so I'll go ahead and put out 2E and a. If we were to divide this in half, each half would be the value of an 8th note. So because we have an 8th note here, that takes up 2E. these next 16th notes would make up and giving us 1 and a. Then, get this out of the way, we have a 16th rest, which can be identified by the 2 flags. That falls on beat 3. Now we have a group of just 3 16th notes. We could think of this as the same as if it was 4. We have 3, the first 16th note, E and A. And finally, beat 4. If you would like practice on this, there's websites out there that can help you. Or you can always come to me and I'd be happy to write you out some examples. If you have questions, definitely let me know. We'll be getting to all of these things in class. That said, again, you might be watching this sort of ahead of the game, which is totally fine too, especially if you've got a bit of a musical background already. But if you want to take your time, you can certainly just kind of wait until we get through these 16th note things in class, and you should be good to go for your test. Good luck.